Hello and welcome to Introduction to Programming for Non-Programmers. My name is Donna Martin. There's some registered trademarks and copyrights that we want to go through that are mentioned in this course. Java is a registered trademark of Sun Microsystems, Inc. Scratch has been created by MIT and the website is scratch.mit.edu. And iPhone is a registered trademark of Apple. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the Introduction to Programming for Non-Programmers course. We are going to talk about programming skills and present the idea of not just the idea of programming, we're going to present programming skills to you, the non-programmer. By the end of the course, you will be programming. So when I say present, I don't want you to think that I'm just going to have these little fireside chats about programming. We are going to be creating programs, explaining concepts, talking about problem solving, and that type of thing. We will specifically create a program to calculate some square roots, so you'll be doing calculations. You'll be asking for input from the user. We're going to be moving some graphics objects around the screen because the language that we have selected to help present programming skills is called Scratch, and it is primarily developed for doing things with graphics. We have little sprites that we're going to move around. It's a fun language, but it also, and it's very straightforward to pick up, but it also really starts letting us build on the programming skills that you would need if you want to move on to other languages as well. And you get to do some fun things during the process. We will prepare you to continue expanding your programming skills so that you can move on to more traditional programming languages if that's your desire. When you've completed this course, you'll be able to write scripts to manipulate graphic objects on the screen. You'll be able to collect input from the user and make decisions based upon that input. And you'll be able to communicate between separately running scripts. This is something called threads, and it's a very cool concept. Not all languages support it directly, but we are fortunate that Scratch does, and it lets you see the introduction to a fairly complex project in a very straightforward way, which is really nice for programmers. And we'll be doing some basic math calculations and doing some comparisons. So these are all things that you would do in programming languages, in any programming language as you get started with solving problems. Now this course is intended for the non-programmer. We do expect that you have a basic familiarity with computers, that you can use your mouse and all those types of things. We are going to be in the very first workshop installing, or the very first module, we'll be installing our programming environment. So we're assuming that you can go to the website we direct you to and that you can do a download and that you can, it's actually a very simple install. There's just several questions you have to answer about where you want the software to go, and we're assuming that you can do that type of thing. But we don't assume any programming skills whatsoever, and we start with just being able to build some programs fairly straightforward with Scratch because it is a visual programming environment. So these are the topics that we're going to cover in this course. The Getting Started module gets us moving. We will do the installation of our programming environment. We'll talk about some programming concepts and just, what we're really trying to accomplish when it comes to preparing you to be able to begin programming. We're then going to take a tour of our programming environment, which is called Scratch, and get you, we'll do a workshop in that particular module, and we'll get you with your first program up and going. We'll also modify some existing programs until you feel really comfortable with creating your own. Then we'll go into Scratch in more detail. It has some really fun little things that you can do, especially since it's intended to be a programming environment for graphics. We can do some kind of fun features that we'll look at in this section. There's quite a few things in Scratch that are specific to the environment, like sounds and things that we're not going to spend much time on. Our goal is to use Scratch to help you become a programmer. So the things that are just fun little extras that you can play with on your own, we won't be going through in the course. Our goal is not to make you a Scratch programmer. Our goal is to use Scratch to help you become a programmer. After that, we're going to talk about problem solving in general. This is a skill that's very important as a computer programmer. Independent of what language you're using, you need to be able to look at a problem and kind of break it down into steps and really make sure you have enough information to solve the problem. So we're going to spend an entire module talking about problem solving. Then we'll move on to talking about variables and operators, such as mathematical operators, and how to get input from a user, and also we'll be getting things up on the screen. Before this, we'll be doing output. So that particular module is variables, operators, and input. And then we're going to talk about something called threads, which I just mentioned is this idea of two totally separate, in our case, graphics objects, or they're called sprites, being able to run independently of each other, but still send some communication things back and forth. Then we're going to tie all these things together, and we're going to show you that some of the things that you've been doing in Scratch, I will show you how you would have done one of the programs in C. So you can indeed tell that you really are programming. Now, for those of you who are interested in pursuing more training on programming, which is kind of what we're assuming since this is an introductory course, here are some options for you to consider. You start with this course, the Introduction to Programming for Non-Programmers. That's going to prepare you to move on to the C course, which has a Part 1 and a Part 2. And then if you're interested in moving on to Python, you could do that as well. It has a prerequisite of C. Or you could move on to Introduction to Programming in Java. There's a Java 5 and a Java 6, and there's a Part 1 and Part 2 of those as well. Or you can move on to Objective-C programming. If you're not wanting to go the C programming route on into Python or Java or Objective-C, for one thing, if you're just wanting to learn C, you could stop at this point. You don't have to move on to these other languages, but it gives you the fulfillment of prerequisites for the other languages. And C is a very nice language in really helping you understand what's happening, not only in a programming world, but it gives you a really good grasp of what's happening with the machine itself. Now, I'm partial to the C class because I wrote it, and I've been programming in C for over 2 decades. Actually, if I think about it and I'm honest, I would say 3 decades of programming with C. Now, if this is not the way that you want to go, if you have other languages that you're interested in learning, you could take the C# class right after taking the Introduction to Programming for Non-Programmers, or you can move on into the Introduction to Perl. And there's 2 parts to that, or you can move on to the Introduction to Ruby class. Really, what you're looking at here, if you're interested in other languages, is just determining what kind of skills that particular class is expecting that you have ahead of time. The Introduction to Programming for Non-Programmers class, this class, is going to help you get prepared in that programming mindset. It will let you do some programming. It's what's called an interpretive language. And so we will be able to, after this class, go ahead and start picking up other languages. So again, after taking this course, you could take C, C#, Perl, or Ruby. You need to make sure that you are comfortable with all the hands-on exercises in this class before moving on. And then when you take another programming class, the same thing. You want to follow these guidelines. Make sure you do all the labs. It's very important that you do it yourself, not just have an understanding of some sort of solution that's presented to you. Once you feel like you've mastered the exercises and the concepts in classes, if you want to learn multiple languages, you're comfortable programming with the one you just finished, then you can move on to the next course. Maybe you want to learn Perl, Ruby, and C# in C, and that's wonderful. Now, if you're interested specifically in programming in the mobile application environment, I didn't say that well at all. If you're specifically interested in programming with the mobile application development environment, in other words, you're interested in doing things with iPhone or Android, then here is a more specific path that you would want to follow. You start with this course if you have no programming background. You would then move into the C course, which again is a 2-part course. Then you could branch into the Objective-C programming and then into the iPhone programming class if that is the area that you're interested in going into. Or you could go from the C programming class into the Java course, either Java 5 or 6. Then you would go into Introduction to Android Programming, and there's also an Advanced Android Programming. Just depends on what mobile device you're interested in, which path you would take. So again, after taking this course, you would take the Introduction to C Programming class. You would make sure that you practice creating the C programs that are in the course. So you, again, just like before, want to make sure that you've been doing the exercises and you're very comfortable with that. But even when you're done with that, it's a good idea to do some programming on your own before moving on. You want to make sure that you are very comfortable writing C programs that involve pointers, functions, structures, loops and control statements, including the switch statement, and that you can do input and output. Now, these things probably aren't going to make a lot of sense to you yet because you're starting right now from a non-programming point of view. But once you've had that C course, you'll understand what all these are, and hopefully will understand their importance and why you need to be very comfortable with those things. Once you're comfortable with that, you can go ahead and move on to the other courses that were mentioned in the flowchart. Now, your goal as an Android programmer, if that's the path that you're taking, is to take the Java 5 or 6 courses, make sure you practice converting the C programs that you learned into Java, and that you're comfortable with the Java language and the Java exercises that were in whichever set of courses you took. Then again, you would move on to the Introduction to Android Programming class, followed by the Advanced Android Programming class. Again, as before, you want to make sure that you really feel you have the concepts from the previous course before you move on. That's just to help you really be able to learn effectively and efficiently and be prepared for the new set of concepts that are going to be introduced in the successive courses. The goal as an iPhone programmer is, after you take this course and you take the C programming course, that you would move into either Objective-C or, and then, actually there's no either there, I'm sorry. After taking the C programming course, you would take the Objective-C course, followed by the iPhone programming course. And again, you want to make sure that you're totally comfortable at the end of each section before moving on to the next. Okay. Lab exercises for this particular course can be downloaded from the download section on the course page. And if at any point you have a question that you want to ask, just use the question comment box. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you enjoy the upcoming modules in the Introduction to Programming for Non-Programmers class.